Hello, I'm Bahami. Today, I want to share with you a brief introduction to electroencephalogram or EEG. The electroencephalogram is one of the most useful tools accessible to clinicians in diagnosing brain disorders as well as researchers to study brain activity. EEG is a measurement of electrical brain activity, and during this procedure, small electrodes are placed on the skull to record the electrical signals produced by collections of neurons in each area of the brain. And various measures must be taken in order to record acceptable signals. For instance, technicians must utilize standard gels to maximize the stability of the contact between electrodes and skin. It is mostly because the surface of none of them is smooth, and there is this probability that even with minor movements, imperceptible movements caused by breathing or even pulse, the electrodes may displace, which can disrupt the signal recording. Also, there are some methods. Actually, there are standard positions for placing the electrodes on the head, known as the International 1020 system, which makes it possible to compare the findings of each study with one another by researchers. And it depends on four main positions of the head. First is nasion, at the bridges of the nose. Then the ilion, the bony prominent at the back of the head, and the two preauricular points just anterior to each ear. As you can see in this picture, the other electrodes are located based on 10% or 20% interelectrode distances. Each side has a letter to identify the lobe and a number or another letter to identify the hemisphere location. The letters F, T, C, P, and O stand for frontal, temporal, central, parietal, and occipital. Note that there is no central though, but this is just used for identification purposes. And even numbers 2, 4, 6, and 8 refer to the right hemisphere, and odd numbers 1, 3, 5, 7 refer to the left hemisphere. The Z refers to an electrode placed on the midline. Also note that the smaller the number, the closer the positions is to the midline. And with the advancement of technology, the number of these electrodes has increased with the goal of maximizing the spatial resolution of electroencephalography, which, while having a high temporal resolution, has a low spatial resolution compared to MRI. We must also know that each recorded signal is obtained by measuring the differential voltages of two electrodes. But is there any principle for recording and after that displaying these signals? Yes, actually there are a variety of arrangements of looking at EEG, which are called montages: bipolar, monopolar or unipolar, common average reference, Laplacian, and so on. The most commonly used montage in each interpretation is bipolar montage. A bipolar montage is based on the principle of comparing a single EEG electrode tracing to its adjacent neighbor. One of the most common bipolar montage is the anterior-posterior bipolar montage. Going through this systematically, we may start by comparing FV2 to F8. This will generate a tracing which we call a channel or derivation. We will then continue posteriorly, starting at F8 and going to T8, generating another channel or derivation. We will continue posteriorly to generate a chain of electrodes along the temporal aspect of the head, and eventually we put a number of these chains together to generate a montage. This is an example of anterior-posterior bipolar montage. First, we have a left temporal chain, then the left parasagittal chain, then a midline chain in the middle, then a right parasagittal chain, and finally a right temporal chain. Well, another type of bipolar montage is the transverse bipolar montage, which is arranged as if we are looking at the top of the head and the patient is facing upward. First, we have a short chain over the forehead, then a long chain extending from left to right over the front of the head, then a very long chain extending from ear to ear, left to right, then a parietal chain, and finally a short parietal occipital chain. And the second type of montage we will discuss is monopolar montage. In this situation, we compare the signal at every electrode placed on the head to a single common reference. For example, those electrodes that we put on the ears could be good choices to be the references, as they are far away enough from the brain and its activities. It is with this aim that at the end, in EEG recording, we will have a signal that shows mostly the activity of the active site of the brain. And there are some sorts of monopolar montage. Seated reference monopolar montage, ipsilateral ear reference monopolar montage, contralateral ear reference monopolar montage, and linked ears monopolar montage. But note, as both bipolar and monopolar montages have their own strengths and weaknesses, it is important that never read an EEG with just one montage. Now, I want to talk about some common EEG patterns. Actually, there are 4 basic EEG frequency patterns. The first one, beta. Beta have the frequency spectrum of 13 to 30 Hz. Beta brainwaves dominate our normal waking state of consciousness when attention is directed towards cognitive tasks and the outside world. The second one, alpha. The alpha waves have the frequency spectrum of 8 to 13 Hz, can be measured from the occipital region in an awake person when the eyes are closed. Alpha brain waves are dominate during quietly flowing thoughts and in some meditative states. The third one, theta. Theta brain waves occur most often in sleep, but are also dominant in deep meditation. Theta is our gateway to learning, memory, and intuition. In theta, our senses are withdrawn from the external world and focused on signals originating from within. And the fourth one, delta. The delta waves have the frequency range of zero point 0.5 to 4 Hz and are detectable in infants and sleeping adults. These waves in a normal adult waking state should not be seen at all. Delta brain waves are slow, loud brain waves, a low frequency and deeply penetrating, and they are generated in deepest meditation and dreamless sleep. The next topic builds phenomena. In EEG recording, one of the disturbing factors is the eyes. The eyeball acts as a dipole. There is a positive pole oriented anteriorly, cornea, and a negative pole oriented posteriorly, retina. When the globe rotates around its axis, it generates a large amplitude alternative current field, which is detectable by any electrodes near the eyes. Vertical eye movements typically are observed with blinks, which we call it Bell's phenomena. A blink causes the positive pole, cornea, to move closer to frontopolar FP1 and FP2 electrodes, producing systematic downward deflections as you can see in this picture. We have also another noteworthy artifact called EEG, which is an indicator of wakefulness that be caused by movements in the limbs or even the forehead muscles. But what is event-related potential? The measurable brain reaction to a particular sensory, cognitive, or motor event is known as an event-related potential or ERP. This stimulus, which causes the nervous system to react, can either be a single occurrence or an event that occurs repeatedly over time. A single stimulation event, for example, an LED that lights up once, elicits a transient response within the captured EEG. And to measure the response, data become evaluated within the time domain. And the periodical stimulation, for example, an LED that flickers with a certain frequency for a couple of seconds, caused a periodic response of the same frequency within the captured EEG data. And to measure the response, data become evaluated in the frequency domain. Now, event synchronized signal averaging. We start our work based on two hypotheses. Firstly, we suppose our brain is a system that every time we give a certain stimulus, each time it generates the same answer. Secondly, the amplitude of the EEG signal is zero on average. Now, we take one EEG channel and separate it into some slices. Each slice begins from 100 milliseconds before one stimulus until, for example, 7 milliseconds after that one, and do it repeatedly. Each time, we repeat the stimulus and put all of the slices under each other like in this picture. Based on our two hypotheses, we expect that in averaging procedure, our EEG signal neutralize each other while the response to the stimulus will remain. In other words, the noises are not synchronized, but the responses are synchronized. Also, we have to know brain response to a single stimulation event follows a characteristic patterns which can be described as time-shifted sequence of positive and negative deflections. And early components of this response, those between 0 and 10 milliseconds are caused by brainstem activity. Components between 10 milliseconds and 100 milliseconds are due to thalamic activity. And later components reflect ongoing cortical activity to process the perceived stimulus. Some ERP components are referred to with acronyms. For example, contingent negative variation, CNV, error-related negativity, ERN, Early, early left anterior negativity, ELAN, closure positive shift, CPS, mismatch negativity, MMN, and most components are referred to by a letter N or P indicating polarity, negative or positive, followed by a number indicating either the latency in milliseconds or the component's ordinal position in the waveform. The next noteworthy topic is classification of evoked potentials. We have sensory evoked potentials, which divided to visual evoked potentials, VEP, auditory evoked potentials, AEV, and somatosensory evoked potential, SSEP. Also, we have motor evoked potentials and event-related potentials. Visual evoked potentials, VEPs, are generated in the visual cortex as a response to a visual stimulus. Commonly used visual stimuli are strobe flash, flashing light emitting diodes, pattern onset offset, and transient and steady state pattern reversal, which is the preferred one. It is mostly because the primary visual system is arranged to be sensitive to the edges and movements. So, using shifting patterns with multiple edges and contrast are the most appropriate method to stimulate and assess visual function. Throughout such experiments, as you can see here, we exhibit an animated checkboard on the screen, and the subject who sits in front of the screen in a comfortable position have to focus on the red point displayed in the center. Also, we have to know that the human brain is designed very sensitive to faces and can distinguish them considerably faster than other things and other objects. Additionally, a negative wave known as N100 appears 100 milliseconds after the face be recognized. Also, we have to know generally visual responses are so strong that for averaging, we don't need to repeat a stimuli several times, and only 4 or 5 repeats could generate an adequate response. The next one, auditory evoked potentials. Auditory responses have a short amplitude that makes us worry to be missed in EEG signals. As a result, to record them, we have to repeat the stimulus several times. Fortunately, as these responses appear quite quickly, we can reduce the intervals of these stimuli greatly. However, we have limitation. We have to take into account habituation and fatigue. The third type is somatosensory evoked potential, or SSEP. That the stimulus in this type could be electrical or mechanical. Actually, mechanical is the more preferred as is less irritating, and typically vibrators be used for this type of experiments. Well, as I mentioned before, in classifying the evoked potentials, the second one was motor-evoked potentials. And they occur when we stimulate the motor cortex. This stimulation would elicit by moving our hand or even wanting to move our hand. Interestingly, we can even see them through a passive movement, or even most excitingly, even if we see another person in a movie that moves his or her hand, the motor cortex of our brain be stimulated. And the third one, which was event-related potentials that do not be elicited by external stimulation, but rather stem from an internal stimulation, like when you watch a photo and subsequently recall something or imagine something. And the last most known concept that I want to talk about, the P300 response. The P300 response is a positive deflection which occurs approximately 300 milliseconds after a visual, auditory, or somatosensory stimulus. And it is mostly related to recognizing and distinguishing, so the subjects have to be fully focused. In other words, the P300 response can only be evoked by presenting a rarely occurring target stimulus, which is presented within a sequence of frequently occurring not target stimuli. And paradigm following this principle are referred to as audible paradigm. And the more different, attention taking, and rare the audible paradigm is, the longer amplitude of the P300 wave we see. Well, it was a summary of some concepts, rules, and methods that I prepared to talk about briefly. Thank you for your attention. I hope it would be useful. Have a good day.